Random House Audio presents The Big Year, a tale of man, nature, and fowl obsession by Obmascik. Read for you by Oliver Wyman, with an introduction read by the author.
Hi, this is Obmascik. The first time I met a real birder, I couldn't tell a tit from a tattler. I was a cub newspaper reporter, stuck in the graveyard shift, and scrambling for some way, anyway, to get off. If I wasn't chasing some awful car accident, I was hustling to find the relatives of a homeless man slashed in a rail yard knife fight. Nobody was happy. Then one night, an anonymous call came into the Denver Post newsroom. "There's a man right here in Colorado," the caller told me, "who's one of the world's foremost experts on birds. He's a law professor, and he's old, and you should write something about him before he dies. His name is Thompson Marsh." A chance to work among the living? I grabbed it. I called Professor Marsh the next day. Professor Marsh, however, never called back. This really bugged me. In my line of work, even grieving widows returned phone messages. Surely a man who was one of the best in his field would want to talk, even if his field was a bit goofy. I decided to chase the story. Slowly, from some of his friends, a picture emerged. Thompson Marsh was a birdwatcher possessed. To chase rare birds, he would rise before dawn on weekends. He would take expensive vacations on desolate Alaskan isles and pray for foul weather. He would wait for phone calls in the middle of the night, then rush to the airport for the next red-eye flight. Only 5 others in history had seen more species of birds in North America. He managed to do all this while becoming a lawyer so sharp, so demanding, that many of his former students still felt intimidated by him. When Thompson Marsh was hired by the University of Denver in 1927, he was the nation's youngest law professor. Now he was 82 and the nation's oldest, having worked the same job for 58 years. Some days he still walked the 4 miles from his home to class. A few years back, he even conquered all 54 of Colorado's 14,000-foot mountains. But the old coot wouldn't pick up a phone to call me. To hell with him, I decided, until his wife unexpectedly called and arranged a meeting at their home. I rang the doorbell on time, and his wife sat me down on the couch and poured tea. Behind her, in a room facing the garden, I spotted a tall, thin man with a shock of silver hair, the Birdman himself. I stood and offered a handshake, but it wasn't accepted. The master legal orator looked down at the floor and said nothing. His wife apologetically explained there would be no interview. "He's a bit embarrassed by it all," Susan Marsh told me. "For some reason, he thinks it's a little silly. Why? I don't know." Actually, she did know. The professor was a proud man who'd been thinking about his newspaper obituary, and he didn't want to do anything now to change the story. Or, as his wife eventually confided, he wants to be known as an attorney, not a birder. I returned to my newsroom and wrote a general story about the quirky world of competitive birdwatching, and then moved on to covering murders and politicians and other typically depressing newspaper subjects. But my memory of that famed law professor, fidgeting horribly before a 23-year-old reporter, still nagged me. What was it about birdwatching that gave a man such joy and discomfort? I couldn't let the question go. Over the years, I learned more about birds and their lovers, and I wrote the strange stories with glee. There was a Baikal teal that caused an international stir by wandering from its native lake in Siberia to a creek behind a Baskin-Robbins ice cream shop outside Denver. There was a biologist who implanted microchips in geese so he could track the spring migration from New Mexico to the Arctic by computer from the comfort of his home. There were even twitters about a new species of grouse, North America's first new animal species in a century, having sex in the sagebrush somewhere in the Utah high country. Slowly but certainly, I realized I wasn't just pursuing stories about birdwatchers, I was pursuing the birds, too. Marsh's obsession was becoming mine. My relentless pursuit of a rare subspecies of law professor had tapped a trait repressed deep in my character. I needed to see and conquer. Today I stroll in the park, and I no longer see plain birds. I see gadwalls and buffleheads, and, if I'm really on a hot streak, a single old squaw. A road trip finds me watching the sky as much as the pavement. It gets harder to pass a sewage treatment pond, that notorious bird magnet, without pulling out my binoculars. When someone cries, "Duck!" I look up. No longer is it accurate to call me a birdwatcher, a term the pros use to dismiss the spinsters and retired British Army colonels who wait passively for birds to come to them. I have become an enthusiast, a chaser, a birder. If Thompson Marsh were still alive, he died in 1992, at the age of 89, from injuries in a car accident on a birding trip, he might even talk to me. He was, after all, my first truly tough bird. Today I can say without hesitation that there are 7 kinds of tits: Siberian, bridled, bush, juniper, oak, tufted, and wren, and 2 tattlers, gray-tailed and wandering. But I can't say this knowledge impresses anyone, certainly not my wife. Why this happened to me, I can't easily explain. It's never been very manly to talk about feelings, especially when these feelings involve birds. But put me on a mountain stream with 2 of our sons, and give us a fleeting glimpse of a bald eagle, and it's hard to tell who's more excited, the 4, 7, or 40-year-old. Birding is one of the few activities you can do from the window of a Manhattan skyscraper or the tent flap of an Alaskan bush camp. Its easy availability may explain why it can become so consuming. There are one-of-a-kind birds living on the streets of St. Louis, below a dam in Texas, and amid the suburban sprawl of Southern California. One of the Earth's greatest avian populations, with 3 million birds passing through each day during spring migration, is in New Jersey, just off the Garden State Parkway. Birding is hunting without killing, preying without punishing, and collecting without clogging your home. Take a field guide into the woods and you're more than a hiker. You're a detective on a backcountry beat, tracking the latest suspect from Mexico, Antarctica, or even the Bronx. Spend enough time sloshing through the swamps or scaling summits or shuffling through the beach sand, and you inevitably face a tough question. Am I a grown-up birder or just another kid on a treasure hunt? During certain periods of our lives, the world believes it's perfectly acceptable to collect rocks or seashells or baseball cards. The truth is that everyone has obsessions. Most people manage them. Birders, however, indulge them. By the time you find yourself compiling lists and downloading software to manage, massage, and count birds, I, have become a hopeless addict. As I spend another winter night by the fire, fingering David Sibley's 545-page birding guide and trying to memorize the field marks of 35 separate North American sparrow species, I'm jarred from self-absorption to self-doubt. Am I weird? Am I crazy? Am I becoming Thompson Marsh? There is, I decide, only one way to fully understand my condition. If birding is an obsession that takes root in a wild crag of the soul, I need to learn how strong it can grow. I need to study the most obsessed of the obsessed. I need to meet the birders of the big year.
January 1st, 1998. Sandy Comito was ready. It was an hour before sunrise, New Year's Day, and he sat alone at an all-night Denny's in Nogales, Arizona. He ordered ham and eggs. He stared into the black outside the window. At this stage in his life, he knew men who lusted for a new wife, or a Porsche, or even a yacht. Comito had no interest. What he wanted was birds. For the coming year, he would dedicate himself to a singular goal: spotting more species of birds in North America than any human in history. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He expected to be away from home 270 of the next 365 days, chasing winged creatures around the continent. There were ptarmigans to trail on the frozen spine of the Continental Divide in Colorado, and hummingbirds to hunt in the heat of the Arizona desert. He would prowl the moonlight for owls in the north woods of Minnesota and wade the beaches of South Florida at dawn for boobies. He planned to race after birds by boat in Nova Scotia, by bicycle in the Aleutian Islands, and by helicopter in Nevada. Sleep was not a priority, but when it came, he would be tossing in the army bunks of Alaska and turning on the rolling waves of the dry Tortugas. This was, after all, a competition, and Comito wanted to win. He ordered his second thermos of coffee and spread paperwork across his placemat. One sheet was an internet printout of a North American rare bird alert from Houston. The other was a regional alert from Tucson. Comito smiled. There were more rare birds spotted last week in southeastern Arizona than anywhere else on the continent. His gut told him that this chain restaurant was the right place to start. He'd eaten in so many Denny's over the years that he didn't have to waste time with a menu. Besides, other birders reported that the trees around this Denny's were roosts for the great-tailed grackle and black vulture. Either of these fine local birds, Comito decided, would be a wonderful launch for his year. From his window, Comito watched the horizon lighten with a gray promise.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?